Hello, good afternoon everybody, and welcome to our webinar on demystifying carbon footprinting, hosted by Green Economy. My name is Talia Charkowska and I'm a green tech consultant at Green Economy and your host for today's webinar. So this webinar forms part of our Demystifying series to help businesses better understand and build the confidence to invest in this sort of green tech and service. In the past, we've done demystifying webinars on demystifying solar, demystifying heat pumps, demystifying LED lighting, and today we'll be demystifying carbon footprinting. So plan for today, we're going to begin with some introductions very shortly, followed by a poll so we can better understand your understanding of carbon footprinting, followed by a panel discussion and a Q&A. So if you have any questions at any point during this webinar, just pop them in the Q&A function on your screen and we'll address them at the end. We'll be recording today's webinar so that we can pop it onto our YouTube channel where you can watch back any of our previous demystifying webinars. So without further ado, we'll begin with some introductions. So over to you, Katie.
Hi, thanks, Talia. I'm Katie Pepper. I'm a carbon footprinting consultant with Green Economy. My background originally is in chemistry, and then I've spent most of my career to date in consultancy, looking at primary and secondary research, with a focus in the last 5 years on sustainability, primarily on footprinting and circularity.
Thank you. And over to you, Rachel.
Hi everybody, I'm Rachel Shaw. I'm Head of Digital and Sustainability at Scott Textiles. We're a Salford-based textile importer, so we supply bed, bath, kitchen and table linen to healthcare, hospitality, as well as retail. I'll hand over to Ollie.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm Ollie. I work for Harbour Dimensions Holdings Limited. We're based in Trafford Park. We are a timber importer, import timber from all over the world, and then we sell it to a wide array of companies, furniture manufacturers, sports equipment, and pipe makers, companies like that.
Thanks, Ollie. So I mentioned that we're going to be doing a poll to help us understand where you're at in your carbon footprinting journey. So I'm going to pass you over to my colleague, Tim, who's going to poll on the screen for you guys.
Good afternoon, everyone. So on the side of your screen, you should see a poll. It's got some options. The question is, how well do you understand carbon footprinting? Please take a minute to answer this question. And you'll also see a second question. Does your organization plan to calculate its footprint? A few options for you to answer there. Please take a minute to go through those as well. And then we'll be readdressing this poll at the end of the webinar. So I'll give you a little bit of time to answer these, and then we can get back to the webinar. Looks like we have a good the responses coming through now, so I'll hand back to you, Talia.
All right, let's get cracking. So let's begin with an intro to carbon footprinting. What is it? Why should we be doing it? So Katie, what is carbon footprinting and what does a carbon footprint measure?
Well, I would say carbon footprinting is essential. It's an essential starting point to understanding the impact you're having on climate change. Carbon footprint is the amount of greenhouse gas emissions generated by our actions as humans. For a business, we would usually start with organizational carbon footprint.
What does a footprint actually measure? I'm guessing it's carbon, but I'm guessing there's a bit more to it.
So it's the greenhouse gas emissions. So we measure it in carbon dioxide equivalent, which is where it takes into consideration all of the greenhouse gases. So if you're thinking about methane or nitrous oxide or the fluorinated gases, they are all given a carbon dioxide equivalent global warming potential, but it's counted in carbon dioxide equivalent.
And why should an organisation be looking into carbon footprinting?
So a business should be looking into their carbon footprint so that they can reduce their carbon footprint. you can't reduce what you don't know. So being able to see the hotspots within your emissions is a good starting point to being able to control those emissions. So when we're talking about a business's carbon footprint, starting with the organizational carbon footprint, this entails gathering data on your usage of your gas, your electricity, transport, raw materials, waste, and then, as I say, converting it into the carbon dioxide equivalent using emission factors. And then once you've done that, that can be your baseline that you then compare to year on year. And if there's certain areas you want to go into more granular detail, or if you want to engage in calculating a product carbon footprint, that's something that you can do depending on what your business does. And then once you've done that, if you want to report your emissions, you can use your baseline and your current emissions to report externally. And also this can help with tenders if you're looking at publicly funded tendering.
And then thinking about common best practice for measuring your carbon footprint, it sounds like there's a lot of data involved. Rachel, how should an organisation be focusing on governing the right data?
Yes, it can feel like it's a bit of a sort of data landscape of what you need to navigate. And I think the general advice is that we sort of start working with your finance teams of sort of where the spending is coming from in the first instance, to sort of identify the numbers. Obviously, that's a spend-based number, which has its shortcomings in terms of allowing for sort of fluctuations of expenditure. It doesn't account for things like distance travelled if we're talking about things like business travel. So at least if you sort of start to work on in my mind, the sort of highest impact categories, especially when we go into sort of scope 3, thinking about your business model, what types of categories is that going to be hitting? So is it waste? For us, obviously logistics is a big one, the sort of upstream and downstream logistics piece, the actual purchased goods and services. There's some scope categories that are being looked at for tenders. So for example, we're on the NHS supply chain framework, and they've got a certain selection of scope 3 categories that they're asking companies to report on. So I think it's been clear whether you've got customers that are starting to ask for certain numbers, focusing on where you can start to make an impact with either the largest spend areas that relate to a category, or where your customers or your industry are asking you to start to kind of report on those numbers. I think that's a good place to start. And then it's looking at the mechanisms and processes to get to a more granular activity data number. So that's one of the things that I would sort of start with, is the spend and then the activity, and taking a bit of a pragmatic approach of picking a few categories to get the ball rolling with first.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess the results are only as good as the data that you put in. So hey, Katie, how do you make sure that the data you're putting in is good quality data?
So I'd agree with Rachel there in terms of, making sure sort of like you're focusing on a few areas to start with. I think looking at everything all at once, you can get a bit overwhelmed. But in terms of data quality, thinking about your source data, like where the data is coming from, whether it's a reliable source, is this something you're going to be able to reproduce? If you are having to rely on some assumptions, making sure you make note of your methodology so that you can compare it with, like, when you come back to it in a year's time, and making sure you're being transparent as well when you are disclosing information, as long as you are clear about what is missing. If you're only reporting on certain categories, then when you come back and you've introduced a new category and it's gone up, you can show why that's happened.
And is there any sort of skills or training that you need to acquire to accurately calculate a carbon footprint? Rachel, did you have to do any sort of training to be able to do it?
So I benefited from the Green Economy, did a Journey to Net Zero course, where some of the things that Katie was talking about there around understanding like the carbon CO2 equivalents and what the conversion factors are, I mean, there's quite a few different bits of sort of software that once you've got the numbers, so whether that's, like you say, how many kilowatt hours of energy, or how many kilometers an item has traveled, or the weights of the goods that you purchase, once you've got at least the numbers, then I think there are certain tools that can, if you're just a team by yourself in an SME, with some training of just understanding what it means, you can start to input numbers into tools that have some of the more advanced conversion factors behind them. So if that is beyond what it can mean to you, that at least gives you the starting point to say, well, these are the numbers, and then you can put them in, and it gives you the broader carbon footprint. I think practically, I'd just sort of say it's the patience piece. I think it's okay that it takes time. I mean, we're still working on adding in some data for our materials, because it's a huge part of what we do, and we needed to change some processes to consistently get the numbers into our system. So I think it's being patient and just being thorough. I think the more that you, to exactly what Katie was saying, that you're just documenting things, questions that you have, and you can refine as you go as well. I think there's a bit of a thing that you have to get it right first time. So I think it's just been like, sort of enjoy the learning process is what I'd say. Like we're all still learning, and there's lots of changes that are happening all the time around how we can get better data. And we work in materials in sort of the textile space, and there's lots more that can come in around the different categories of materials that we can be measuring as well. So yeah, be patient and thorough.
Patient and thorough. Ollie, is it a similar scenario over at Hardwood? What approach did you guys take to carbon footprinting?
I would say Rachel's bang on, patience is key. When I first started doing it, I was like Rachel. I went on the Journey to Net Zero course in January 2023, came out of it, and I thought, right, I'm going to do all this now. I'm going to get it right first time, blah, blah. And I started looking at everything, all these scopes and all this data, and I was just, when your head explodes. So Rachel's right. You take a step back. You start spend-based methods. She's correct. It's not great data. It's not really accurate, but it's better than nothing. And then once you've got a full-on understanding, or you're getting better at it, that's when you can go into weight-based emissions, distance, stuff like that. And then you can start looking at your scopes, scope 2, scope 3.
Okay. Yeah, it's super useful hearing from businesses that have done it themselves. Thinking about the details then, so scope 1, 2, and 3, we hear those terms all the time. You guys have mentioned it yourselves, but let's help the audience understand. Katie, can you explain what scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions are?
Yeah, so these are terms that come from the greenhouse gas protocol. So this is like a guide to how to calculate your emissions. And they categorize them into scope 1, which is usually mostly made up of your natural gas, and it's termed as a direct emission. It's also your company vehicles. So this is like when you turn on your heating, or when you start the ignition, that's when the emissions occur, and that's directly from you and your usage. Scope 2, mostly usually made up from electricity, and this is termed as an indirect emission, even though this is something that is directly under your control because of your usage. It's actually the emissions occur at grid, and unless you've got solar panels, etc., the emissions aren't actually occurring on site. So you're getting the power from the grid. And then moving on to scope 3, this is made up from your upstream and downstream value chain. These are also indirect emissions that occur from everything from mining the ore that's makes up the goes into your steel that makes up your scaffolding, to your end of life of where that metal goes once you've finished using it. Also your how that material gets to you and how it gets to your customers. So there's a lot of different moving parts, and that we say scope 3 generally takes up at least 80 to 90% of your footprint. So scope 1 and 2 are a really good start, but scope 3 is kind of where we really get into the bigger weighting of the emissions and where we can look into things. But it does take a lot of work with your supply chain to be able to get good data for this scope.
Yeah, I always hear that scope 3 are the trickiest of them all. Rachel, how did you find looking into the trickiest scope 3 emissions?
Yeah, I think it helps. There's a kind of subcategory of the scopes. We've got like the upstream and the downstream. And I think the upstream is sort of where it's a little easy to start. So for us, because we are on the NHS procurement framework, they've set out, I think, about 4 or 5 scopes that they want suppliers to complete, and they're all upstream. So that's your upstream transport and distribution. So that's the logistics and the vans and the way that you've got goods to you when you've procured them. Waste generated operations, business travel and employee commuting, which sort of relate more to obviously your staff and what they're doing. And then there is one other downstream one, which is downstream transport and distribution, which plays sort of similar to Ollie, where you're bringing goods in, that's the upstream, and then getting them to your end customer is then the downstream. So that's sort of where it's a bit easy to focus on, because that's looking at what goods and services that you're buying or working with your staff. The downstream ones where it's about the in-use phase and the end of life, that is, I think that for most businesses now is still the last scary category to deal with, because there's a lot more, sort of the technology and the data piece to really get the robust numbers to have something that is a number that you'd want to stand by. But what I'd say is, the good thing is if you're getting goods in from a consistent location, once you know that location and the type of vehicle that your supplier is bringing in on, whether it's a HGV, whether it's on rail, whatever that, if they've got a van, there's a lot of companies now that are delivering goods to you with maybe an EV van. So it's kind of keeping a watchful eye on, where you're getting your goods and services from. And then by asking your suppliers that you've got good relationships with, it can help you sort of get into that data a little bit more. So it's just starting to sort of dig away a little bit, ask questions. Certainly if it's sometimes somebody else working with different colleagues who are accountable for that spend or that kind of service, it can help you just sort of ask additional questions to help work out how do we get to the right number here.
And is it the same for you, Ollie? What was scope 3 the trickiest over?
Yes, scope 3 is even, well, I don't want to compare, but it's I found it a nightmare doing it for us because of the way we procure timber. We get it from all over the world, all these different mills from the East Coast of America, Africa, Malaysia, Indonesia, places like that. They're not really too bothered about emissions, if I'm honest with you. They don't record that much data. And if they do, it's minimal, sort of thing like that. So I have to ask them and say, have you got this? And they don't, that sort of thing. So there's an element of guessing. There's an element of having to work out yourself. Rachel's right. When I work out our shipments from America, for example, over to England, big container ship, your suppliers will do roughly the same route each time. So you'll have the distance laid down in kilometres, and then it's just down to you to work out the tonnage, your emissions factors like that, throw your times in. So once you've got a database of that, it's fine. It's when you're sort of procuring things from new places or a different mill this time, and it's like, well, I don't know the distance for that. So it can be a bit of a minefield. Downstream, when we're selling stuff, we sell our timber. We get different transport companies to take it away for us. Now, when I first started working it out, I thought, oh, they're going from point A to point B. It's taking it from Trafford Park, where we are, to Glasgow. And I was reliably informed last year that at least 2 of the companies that we use, they don't operate like that. They'll pick it up from here, they'll take it to a depot, reload it onto another lorry, and then take it to Glasgow, but stop off at different places on the way. Now, we've got no way of knowing where they stopped off along the way, where they've gone, which type of lorry it is. And my next job in the future is to try and work out or ask them, can you give us this information? If not, why not? And can you join this with us, sort of thing?
So yeah, it's very important to work with your value chain to gather all those scope emissions.
I'll just jump in as well, if that's okay. On the employee travel one, that can make life a bit easier, in the sense that at least for stuff that relates to your employees, there's a little bit of a mechanism to sort of look at how you can either survey your staff. We're looking at making a few tweaks to travel policies and bookings. So otherwise, if you're only relying on somebody bought a flight for £400, that £400 could be a short haul or a long haul flight. And then obviously the carbon footprint to that obviously can change massively based on whether, even if you were economy or business class. So that's one of the things that we've got the spend. We've got a few examples where we know people have taken journeys to London, for example, for business on the train. So the trains are a bit easier to get an activity number on. But I think in a good way, this is the kind of financial upsell of it, is the more you're asking questions, you can pitch it to the finance teams to be like, well, it's going to make us have a more like robust oversight of like the spending, which I think is always a good little angle, just to sort of work with the data that you can leverage from like your team and stuff as well.
Win-win. You've obviously touched on this, but how do you go about engaging with partners in your value chain to identify these emissions? How do you actually, like, can you go into a bit more detail on how you get that data from them?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for us, an example of the materials one, it's probably sort of similar to Ollie, where, you know, we've got records of all the things that we've purchased, but quite often they're in lots of different places. So one of the things we were starting to do for the materials piece for us was actually asking a couple of our more sort of tier one, like more sort of higher spend mill partners and stuff like, well, could you just send us a report? Like, you have the numbers on your side, just send us a report for the year of obviously what we've purchased from you in the material, so we can very quickly get to some numbers. So that's one way. And the other interesting way that I'm starting to see it is for us, probably for companies that are a bit more of a supply chain, recognizing when your customer is going to ask you for that data. So we're starting to get some customers who are measuring their scope 3 and they want the materials. So I've been looking at some processes as well for us as a supplier as well, because I think we can sometimes lose sight of, depending on your business model, you might also, your customer, you're the supplier of your customer. So, you know, holding yourself to a similar sort of level of accountability for, you know, how you can sort of provide data. And if you're not getting it, just sort of see if you can have a conversation in terms of requesting additional data. I think that's one of the things that's starting to be more proactive here now, is where you're having good conversations with supply chain partners. In some instances, if they've got a sort of sustainability colleague, it can create a different conversation if you're just trying to go through either procurement or finance. Sometimes you might be like, oh, this person knows where we can get that data from. So it's just asking the right questions or trying to find the right people who in the organization can help you get to the information you need.
Thing to add, Ollie, on how to get that information?
No, it's pretty much the same with us. You don't ask, you don't get. As an SME, a lot of the suppliers that we buy timber off, we're a drop in the ocean for them. So a couple of times they'll just go, yeah, and they string you along, and you don't really get anywhere. So you don't ask, you don't get. There's no harm in asking. The suppliers that you do have a better relationship with, you ask them, they will give it to you. Some of our American suppliers, without going into too much detail, have got a document called an environmental profile, which when they export a pack of white oak to us, on there will be basic information, you know, emissions from the kiln drying, when they were kiln drying the logs, the distance from the forestry to their mill to another mill, blah, blah, blah. So if you use that, that's great, but not all the companies will give you those. Not all of them are signed up to the membership organisation that gives you that. So it depends who you are, really, unfortunately.
Okay, let's think about the benefits of understanding your carbon footprint. Katie, what can your carbon footprint be used for? You mentioned procurement earlier.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of different ways that you can use your carbon footprint once you've measured and started looking into it. I think there's the internal examination that you can do, and as Rachel was sort of touching on earlier about, you know, cost saving. So a lot of the time when you're saving carbon and emissions, you are saving yourself money as well. So it's not only the right thing to do in terms of the planet, but will also save you money and make business sense to do a lot of these things. So, you know, whether it's upgrading machinery or, you know, sometimes we look at people's data and they are heating the factory or whatever it is on Christmas Day, and, you know, they didn't realize, because it's just a cost that they have. They pay their electricity bill and they've never really delved into it. So there's, yeah, as I say, internal things like that. And once you've got your emissions, you can start to make a carbon reduction plan with some specific targets that you know that you're going to be able to achieve and measure, because you've got those data points to build on. And then externally, you can use that for reporting. So if you want to publish your like an ESG report with your carbon emissions, and that can help with investor relations, and also, as I said, responding to tenders. And Rachel again mentioned about sort of the NHS procurement. That's now sort of stipulation that you have to have the full scope 1, 2, and the 5 categories out of the 15 of scope 3. It also helps to build customer confidence. So if you know that you've got your own house in order, you are a supplier, therefore you're part of somebody else's value chain. And yeah, it's I think it's just something that really every business needs to now be thinking about because of the increasing awareness and increasing legislation as well. So if it's not the NHS, it's going to be somebody else tomorrow that's going to be asking you about your carbon footprint and how you're reducing it. And being able to have those answers, I think is going to become sort of increasingly important, and reducing risk within your business. Because if you don't know that these things you're procuring are from areas that could be affected by climate change, then that puts your value chain at risk. So having sort of oversight of all the moving parts and increasing relationships with your supply chain. So having to ask for this data, this might be the first time you've engaged with certain suppliers, but it might be something that then sets you apart as well. So you improve that relationship, and also with clients, you become a trusted partner if you know the right answers to give. So yeah, I think it's important.
Yeah, if you're not being asked for it now, you will be very soon. And you've all mentioned it's something you require patience for, so I don't think it's something you want to be doing in the last minute. Reminder, everyone, there is a Q&A function if you do have any questions on anything we've discussed thus far. So let's think about the benefits, changes you've seen as a result of calculating your carbon footprint. So Rachel, have you made any changes in your business as a result of calculating your carbon footprint?
I think for us, it's starting to indicate the bigger changes that we need to make in terms of investments and potential broader changes. I mean, a small one that we have done is for us, we bring goods in, obviously in containers, in boxes, and then obviously like the sheets and the kind of linen products are wrapped in plastic bags. So we've already had customers asking us to move to recycled plastic packaging. But at the moment, in some of our packaging, we've got like multiple, like, so you've got like 20 duvets in a box. It might be like they're packed in 5, so then you've got 4 packages of like 5 duvets. So we've been doing some work to start to sort of streamline the amount of packaging that we're sending out, and then being able to sort of measure the changes of moving from the virgin plastic to the recycled plastic, from the weight of multiple bags to single bags. So very quickly you can start to kind of tell the benefits of the small changes that you've made even in year before we've reported on them. So I think that's one good example. It's a bit frustrating for us in some instances as well, like the logistics piece. Until sort of further innovations come, you can't massively change where you're getting some goods from. And it does start to raise some very interesting ethical questions. So, for example, we source a lot from Pakistan and India. That's where a lot of cotton production is. At the point where if everyone starts to nearshore items, actually we're sort of impacting livelihoods in other countries. So from a broader procurement piece, it starts to make you really think about what levers you can draw on. So that's why for us the materials piece is a really big one. When there's still some polyester material that we source, well, if we can reduce some of the polyester content, because that virgin polyester obviously is derived from fossil fuels. So very quickly, when you see those big hotspot areas, they can take you a little longer, but it already starts to drive conversations about where can we make the most meaningful differences, and sort of put forward investment cases for things like solar. We've got a large warehouse that we own, so we could put solar on the roof, which will obviously reduce the footprint of our sort of scope 1 and 2 energy. So yeah, little changes, but it starts to show you the level of ambition and investment that then is actually needed to really sort of drive the reductions that we need to get to net zero.
Same question to you, Ollie. Have you made any business changes as a result?
Yeah, we've had a couple of on-site changes. When I first did our baseline a year or two ago, we used, I've not got the exact number, we used a lot of electricity. And late last year, we've got 5 warehouses here. We had some solar panels put on the roof of our bottom warehouse, all the way down at the bottom. And I think that's reduced our electricity usage by, I think me and Katie worked out to 54% already, just like that, with a roof full of solar panels. We had some cavity wall insulation done a few months ago in preparation for a heat pump / new boiler. Next job's to get the windows done. And when I first started here, there was a bit embarrassed to say, actually, there were no recycling facilities. So I went on the net zero course and I came back and I was like, don't recycle this. Everyone recycles at home, why not recycling here? And again, I've not got the exact figures on top of my head, but we've reduced our wastage massively just by a simple recycling bin outside. It's little things like that you don't sounds like you're stating the obvious or you think they're too easy, but it is things like that that do have a massive impact on you.
Okay. Right. So I think we're coming to an end. So we're going to look at the Q&A now. So I'm going to invite Tim back into the room. But do the panelists have any additional advice on all things carbon footprinting, or do you feel you've covered it?
I'll just emphasise patience again. I know me and Rachel keep banging on about it, but it is imperative, because if you the guys who are watching this, if you go away now and start to do it, and you'll start reading, I mean, I don't know how much you all know, but you'll start reading about scopes and category 3A and 3 to 2 or whatever, and your head will just explode. So it's okay to get things wrong. It's okay to take months, maybe a year or so, but it's fine. It's okay. Take your time. Everything will be all right.
Yeah, the only bit I'd add, I think, for us, we've been quite fortunate because we're more in a B2B industry, is working with your industry associations. So for us, there's something called the Textile Services Association, which encompasses laundries, which are obviously our customers, and then a number of different supplier groups. And we've had some really good, did like a sort of supplier showcase day where we kind of advocated to get suppliers to talk about what they were doing. They're doing a lot of work to start to bring in a sort of shared industry calculator that they're almost kind of trying to encourage everyone to start to input their data, and there's a lot more conversations about the method that we take as suppliers to try and drive some harmonization. And I think where you want to try and work with your industry to drive a level of approach before legislation comes in, I think that can also help to sort of avoid you kind of feeling like you're getting left behind. And there's a lot more pre-competitive discussions that are happening in certain industries now, where it's actually in everyone's interest to kind of agree, we're going to measure these things in this way, because actually the whole greenwashing bit and companies being a bit misleading with what numbers they're trying to sort of portray, that's the thing you also want to be mindful of, is working with people who are there to sort of support your business and industry as well. I think there's a lot of support out there, in addition to, you know, great organizations like Green Economy that are sort of sector agnostic. See what's going on in your industry, because there's loads of different initiatives that are happening that are sector specific that might be beneficial for you as well.
Yeah, I think that's important as well. Yeah, there's plenty of working groups across different industries, and working with your peer groups as well to look at things. Yeah, I think they're both Swisscot and Hardwood Dimensions have both looked at things from different angles and come to sort of you know, a lot of different conclusions. But I think the main thing is sort of yeah, not worrying about having too many to start with, or, you know, your carbon footprint can grow. At the Growth Company, we started with looking at scope 1 and 2 and a few categories of scope 3, and then we introduced another category, and our carbon footprint went up. And we have been transparent in our reporting and shown that that increase, and that's totally fine, because we've got like the narrative around it to say the reasons why this has gone up. We're trying to be more transparent, we're collecting more data, we're collecting better data, and that is part of our journey to net zero. So yeah, I think transparency is key, and making sure you've got the narrative around things. If you are omitting some data for any reason, make sure that that's clear, so that, you know, if somebody else is looking at it, it doesn't look, oh, why have you missed that out? Why is that so high, kind of thing? Because those are the things that will build confidence in your reporting. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, there's no more valuable insight than hearing it from the people that are doing it themselves. It's all well and good someone telling you to do a carbon footprint, but actually hearing from someone that has done it themselves is incredibly insightful. So, like I said, we're going to move on to the Q&A. So if there are any questions, Tim is going to address them now.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you to our panelists for taking us through carbon footprinting. It's been very insightful. I've been taking my notes and I'm looking forward to impressing people with my newfound knowledge after this webinar. It seems that the detail of this webinar has been so good that there's actually not too many questions coming through. We've been very comprehensive in our description of carbon footprinting and how we might use it, which is very positive. I suppose, as there are no questions coming through, apologies if there's a little repetition of this, but it might be interesting to go to each of our panelists, and I'd like to know if you could speak to your past self as you first sat down on your carbon footprinting journey. What's one little tip or piece of information that you wish you knew at the very start, which might have been very valuable in your journey and perhaps helps equip you for the journey a bit better? And Katie, for you, I suppose, what's the first piece of advice you find yourself giving to organizations as they approach you at the start of their carbon footprinting journey? While we think of these, I'll see if any more questions are coming through.
I think one point to make is that we're talking about sustainable development. So this is not something that is supposed to stunt growth. If your business is growing and you are expanding and taking on more staff, when you're looking at your organizational carbon footprint, you can measure this via compared to turnover, or another factor that you choose, and have that as a marker, so that yes, your overall might be growing, but your actual sort of ratio is decreasing, so you are doing the right things. And sort of when somebody comes to me when they're starting out, I would say, don't panic. Yes, there might be a lot of data to collect, but once you've sort of built up the relationships and you know where to look for things, it's hopefully not going to be as hard as the first time. Yeah, make sure you record your methodology and where your data sources are coming from, all of the emission factors you use, so that you can make progress and make it easier for yourself the next time round.
I'd add, I think I was quite lucky the timing of when I started it, because I think I did the course in the summer, and then as I was sort of starting to grapple with it, was sort of getting to September, October time, and our financial year runs Jan to December. So I think my bit of advice would be mindful of when your financial year is, in the sense that if you've got a team that would then be getting those numbers together. So if you were, say you were baselining, let's say if you were baselining now for 2023, we're in 24 now, you then would get your second year of numbers maybe around your sort of January, February of this year, once your final sort of invoices and things come through. So I think that can give you a bit of a helpful start to think about the timing of when you'd need to do it. And then, you know, especially we need to rely on finance for a lot of the numbers, like you can sort of tee them up and get people bought in as to when you might be asking lots of questions.
You all know what I'm going to say. Patience. Just take your time with it. I can't preach it enough without sounding like a broken record. It's okay to be wrong. Patience. We all add that to that.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. I think that's probably it for our Q&A section today. Jade, I saw a question from you in the chat. If there's a useful beginner's guide on the Green Economy website under our Net Zero Toolkit, we have a range of guides for businesses that cover all types of decarbonisation, green tech, and sustainability information that you might need. And one of them is a beginner's guide to carbon footprinting. If anyone else is interested, I posted the link in the Q&A function. Back to you, Talia.
We've done your poll, sorry.
And yeah, we'll do the closing poll now. So same questions at the start, but it's a different one. So I'll launch these now. How well do you understand carbon footprinting? And does your organization plan to calculate its footprint? If anyone could please take a moment just to answer these questions in the poll, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
All right, I'm sure you've had enough time. So I'll tell you a bit more about what the decarbonisation team at Green Economy does. So we've been learning a lot about carbon footprinting today, and if you do feel like you're ready to take the next step, we can offer that as fully funded support to you. So if you do want some support with your carbon footprinting, please do get in touch with Green Economy. On the next slide, there's going to be a QR code that you can scan if you wanted to make an inquiry. But they do all sorts on that decarbonisation team. They can carry out a physical audit, attend your premises with their energy loggers, their thermal imaging cameras, and they might suggest you should get a new boiler and some LED lighting and you'll save this much carbon and this much money on your energy bills. They also have a grant that can go towards implementing any sort of green tech. So it's 5K match funding and it can cover heat pumps, LED lighting, motors and drivers. They can support you to put in place an environmental policy or a carbon reduction plan. And it can also help you find some local suppliers. We've created a green economy marketplace full of green local suppliers. If you're trying to find a local solar installer, for example, you can do so very easily. And we've also developed a green economy carbon calculator to help you with your carbon footprinting. So I'm going to pass you over to Katie to expand on that.
Thanks, Talia. Yeah, so this is a little bit of a sort of first look at the new carbon calculator. It's been in the works for a little while now, and we're just kind of going through the last few snagging areas. So it still requires you to do all of the data collection, but once you have your data, you can add it into the sections, and then it will calculate the tons of carbon dioxide equivalent for you. So and when we were talking about emission factors, this is all built into the calculator, and you get a number straight away as you're typing in the numbers. You can add different areas, so all of your different categories of scope 3, all of your different emissions for your transport, things to do with your buildings or your raw materials. This you can all save and come back to, or you can also get it to generate a report for you at the end, which has some tables, and you can have your baseline and your current year, so you can use it again and again. This is something that's going to be available in the next few weeks, we hope. So yeah, we're just doing the last little bit of testing. So if 5 people wanted to volunteer and pop me an email, then I'll send out some test links. so that we can just see if we can break it one more time, and I can sort it out with the developers before we officially go live. But yeah, this hopefully will be something that will help reduce time and have reduced the amount of patience that's needed throughout the carbon footprinting journey.
Thanks, Katie. I mentioned that QR code. If anything we've said today is of interest, which I hope it is, you can scan that QR code and it will take you to a form where we can then reach out to you and explain a bit more about what we can do together. But thanks to everyone on the panel today. Thank you to all the attendees, and you get 15 minutes back of your lunch, which is nice. So till next time.
Thanks, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.